Good evening. My name is Kijua Sanders McMurtry. I use she, they pronouns. I'm actually here in Western Massachusetts joining you all tonight on behalf of the Joseph and Evelyn Lowry Institute for Justice and Human Rights. I'm at Mount Holyoke College, which is the place where I work, but I also happen to love being a part of a weekly book club on racial justice as part of the Lowry Institute's continued activism. Tonight's talk is actually a dialogue between myself and Dr. Rafael Ocasio, who is a professor at Agnes Scott College and wrote the incredible book, Folk Stories from the Hills of Puerto Rico. I'm very excited for you all to hear the dialogue about his incredible book, and I invite you to read the book as part of our book club. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you enjoy tonight's live cast. Thank you.
Evening, Rafa. I'm so excited. Okay, I'm going to do a formal introduction of you in just a moment, but I have to just express my extreme excitement that I am doing book club with you featuring your book. So first, thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited to have you here. How are you feeling tonight?
Friend, I am on cloud number 9, as they say. You know that we go back many years. I won't say how many years, and we have worked together for so long. And I like the kind of work that you're doing, and to me, it's very exciting to be here presenting my book.
Yes. Well, so just for everyone who's joining us, I'm Kijua Sanders McMurtry. I use she, they pronouns, and I am the book club facilitator for the Joseph and Evelyn Lowry Institute for Justice and Human Rights. This book club was born out of the vision of the CEO, Cheryl Lowry, and the work of all of the individuals who work for the Lowry Institute. Is something we started in the summer of 2020 during a really difficult time, as we all know, in the United States and around the world. And it's honestly one of the most beautiful moments that we've experienced. I heard Arundhati Roy talk about the pandemic being a portal, meaning that there were openings that happened because of sort of the ways humans were having to re-engage and interact. And I can say that, to be honest, the book club is one of the things that I felt came out of the pandemic for me as one of the most positive experiences of my life. We are so excited to have folks watching us this evening and engaging with this incredible book club. And this is a racial justice book club. It's called Race Towards Reconciliation for a reason, because we're always thinking about racial healing. This time, we're featuring an incredible book, and we chose this book because of Latinx Heritage Month, but also more importantly, because the individual who I'm going to introduce formally is one of the local faculty members and professors, an esteemed scholar. And we're so excited that he could join us. He also at one point was a member of the book club. We still consider him a member of our book club. But what most people didn't know as he was engaging in different discussions is that he is an author himself, a quite prolific. I'll later talk about all of his books. But tonight, I'd like to introduce Dr. Rafael Ocasio. He is the Charles A. Dana Professor of Spanish at Agnes Scott College in Decatur, Georgia, near Atlanta. He teaches upper level courses on Latin American literature and film, as well as Spanish language courses. He is the author of several books on Latin America and Caribbean literature and culture. And tonight we're going to be discussing his book, Folk Stories from the Hills of Puerto Rico. So Rafa, now that I've done that introduction, I want to talk to you so much about this book. I was so honored to be able to have a copy of this book and read the book. And because I know that you love your beloved homeland, I thought we might start there. Tell us a little bit about Puerto Rico, what it means to be Puerto Rican to you, and how and why you wrote this particular book.
Certainly. Thank you again, Kijua. This book, I will say it's a labor of love. I wanted to gather a collection of Puerto Rican folktales that spoke about what it is to be Puerto Rican. However, there is an interesting twist to this book. This book was born out of a previous book that I wrote about a visit to Puerto Rico by Franz Boas, the founding father of American anthropology, who visited the island in 1915. As part of his anthropological work that he was doing there, he wanted to collect what often is referred to as the largest collection of oral folklore from a Spanish-speaking country, country or a territory. And I stress the territory part because, as you know, Puerto Rico has never been a country, politically speaking, but culturally speaking, it has been since day one. The stories that Boas collected in 1915 reflect in many ways what it is to be Puerto Rican. And he was very much interested in gathering Puerto Rican cultural practices, whether they were religious, social, economic. And that's the book that I put together. The collection is literally my favorite stories. However, I was very mindful that in putting together a collection of Puerto Rican folktales, Puerto Ricans themselves would be expecting certain stories and certain characters. So in a way, not only it is stories that I liked, stories that I heard as a child or read as a child, but stories that reflect Puerto Rican folklore today. What it means to me is, as a Puerto Rican, it's a reflection of who we are, a reflection that was very clear in 1915. It was very clear in 1815. It was very clear in 1715. The city of San Juan, for instance, is celebrating this year its 500th anniversary. So we come from a long tradition of culture. And that's what I wanted to celebrate, Puerto Rican culture.
I love that, Rafa. I think, it's so interesting. I mean, I've known you, right, so many years, and you've always been so proud of Puerto Rico. And I'm going to talk a little bit later about our trip to Puerto Rico. But, when you think about, I love what you said about I mean, this being the 500th anniversary, but even how important these stories were to document, and that for yourself as a child, they were such an important, part of your life. So I guess I want to ask you two questions here. So I'm gonna try to figure out which one to ask first. But one, I think I want to talk about the stories. Can you tell us a little bit about who Juan Bobo is? And so
Okay.
hopefully I've said his name
Yes.
correctly, but just a little bit about who he is and who he was to you maybe as a child and who he is to you now. Anything about that?
So as I mentioned, not only the stories are my favorite stories, but that there are stories that are iconic to Puerto Rican folktales. And the character that you're mentioning is Juan Bobo.
Mhm.
Bobo, as if you know a little bit of Spanish, or even if you don't, you hear that it sounds a little bit like slow, dummy, and that's basically the origin of the character. The character is usually portrayed as a child or a young man, can be a teenage boy as well, who either is literally a slow learner, as we would call those individuals today, or, and this is the part that I like the best, or it's a child or young person who pretends that he is out of the loop so that he can take advantage of people that way. So in a way, the tricks that he plays on people are tricks that are usually meant to gain something, and that something is usually money. He often gets the money. He often is successful in his tricks. But however, there are many stories in which he's punished because he's found out.
Mm-hmm.
So that character is often seen in Puerto Rico as the character who knows how to make do, the character who knows how to survive, the character who knows how to read people, and he places himself in a within a context of survivor. Let's survive. Let's financially find a way in which we can go ahead.
Yeah, it's so interesting, Rafa. I mean, even I remember, I feel like stories like this are so resonant, right? Like that's the
Mhm.
beautiful thing about books is that you don't have to be of the culture or of the community to actually like imagine, right? But it almost like sort of paints a picture that I think is so beautiful. And I know that um even hearing you talk about it, I can kind of like see you as a child. And just like learning these stories. Is there one that was your favorite? And were you reminded of that when you were doing this book? Like, was there something like that you always remembered from childhood? And how did that come up for you in this book?
Well, the one that most Puerto Ricans will remember, will know for sure, it's the one in which Juan Bobo dresses up a pig with his mother's jewelry and clothes and stuff, and sends her out to meet her at mass. And it's still a joke. Often when a person is wearing way too much stuff in Puerto Rico, they will say, well, you're looking a little bit like Juan Bobo's pig. And
Oh, wow.
that's what it means, that either it's too much jewelry or too much something.
That's great, Rafa. What's interesting about it too is like, right, like the fact that it's still part of like so much of the culture, right, and the sort of oral tradition as well. Can we talk a little bit about that? So, why do you think? I know you've written many, many scholarly books. I mean, we could probably build a library out of the number of books that you've written. I'm
Mhm.
not joking. For those of my, if those people who are not familiar, please like check out all the books written by Professor Ocasio. Um, this was a little bit of a different like book for you, right? And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about why it was important to preserve this history. I know most of your work is about preserving sort of history and culture, particularly of Latinx culture, but it's really interesting that you took this turn. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So this book started literally out of my exploration of short stories that a late Puerto Rican writer, Judith Ortiz Cofer,
Hmm.
was writing. Judith Ortiz Cofer will come into or comes into the literary books as the first Latinx writer nominated for the Pulitzer Prize. I should have said the first Latina writer, because
Yeah.
the same year that she was nominated for the Pulitzer Prize, Oscar Hijuelos was also nominated for the Pulitzer Prize, and Oscar Hijuelos won the Pulitzer Prize that year in 1989 for Mambo Kings. Judith and I became very good friends because just by coincidence as well, in 1989, I arrived to Agnes Scott, and Judith was teaching at the University of Georgia. So since day one, after we met in Atlanta, we became very good friends. And at one point, she started writing what she was calling reinterpretations of Puerto Rican folktales. And at one
Mm.
point, one of the stories sounded familiar, but I couldn't remember why. So I did a Google search, and the name of Boas, Franz Boas, came together with that reference. And that's how I came
Wow.
across the fact that Franz Boas was behind the recopilation of various um, um, examples of the same stories that Judith was writing. Judith, on the other hand, heard those stories from her maternal grandmother in Puerto Rico. So I became very much interested in the fact that this Puerto Rican writer who grew up here in the United States, she was 2 years old when she came to the United States, but her family took her back and forth often during her childhood and early youth years, that she would be so much interested in documenting the stories that she heard from her grandmother. And
Mm.
so when I discovered the collection by Boas, I was very much interested in the fact that Franz Boas wanted to develop, as I said, this large collection of oral folklore that even today is among the largest oral folklores in collections in Spanish. Why was Franz Boas so much interested in this collection of stories. My opinion, and this is a very basic way of approaching it, Franz Boas and many other American anthropologists who started going to Puerto Rico to do field research almost immediately after the Spanish-American War in 1898. All of these anthropologists, in my opinion, were thinking that Puerto Ricans soon would stop being Puerto Rican, soon would stop using Spanish as their first language and become Americans and forget Puerto Rican culture and take on American cultural patterns, including the use of English. That didn't happen, as you know. However, there is this collection in which the stories, and the collection is so large that it includes conundrums, poetry, what else? Nursery songs, and countryside music. The collection reflects the Puerto Rican culture at the time, and in my opinion, it's an expression of what today you still see in the field of oral folklore. Many of these stories are still examples for writers. Many Puerto Rican writers on the island and in the United States continue to rewrite versions of these stories.
It's so interesting. I mean, Rafa, so I'm going to only ask 2 more questions, and I know we have a special guest, but I want to say, like, I think so much about all of your work, right? I mean, I know you wrote a book before called Race and Nation in Puerto Rican Folklore, and, you know, and it has a much longer title, but it's really about sort of what you've been talking about and why you even, I think, explored this work. And so I really, really, I think that, you know, hopefully people will read even more of your work, but I hope this entry point is a really exciting one for folks.
Yes.
So the book cover, I was thinking about this, what all of your books, you have such interesting covers. I think, have you written 7 books, Rafa? Is that how many now? 8?
I think it's 8, but
8,
I can't
okay,
remember.
I thought it was 8. I was trying to count and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't even keep up. I feel like you had 3 in 1 year that came out. Is that correct?
Yes, the pandemic was
Okay.
very good to me.
Okay. Well, so tell me about the cover of this book. And I'm going to ask you a little question next
Okay.
about sort of Taino culture, but go ahead.
The interesting part of Boas's curiosity to document Puerto Rican culture was that he became very interested in documenting the culture as seen by Puerto Rican peasants. So a good amount of the stories, you can see the influence of Puerto Rican traditions as practiced in the countryside. The cover is by a Puerto Rican painter who is very well known for his depiction of the Puerto Rican peasant. The interesting, or not interesting, the personal aspect of this book is that I am literally the first generation in my family born in San Juan. My mother and my father were both born in the countryside, and they saw themselves living in San Juan at various points of their life, but their childhood and youth years, their cultural formation is still, or was in my father's case, he's deceased. Their cultural background is certainly peasant. And so growing up, I heard many stories about growing up in the Puerto Rican countryside. Often we have this romantic view that the countryside is a cool place to grow up because there are trees and children can play, and clean water and blue skies. In the case of my mother, if my mother was here, she would tell you, I was so happy when they took me away from the countryside. My father, on the other side, on the other hand, had a more romantic view because his family owned a little farm. But in the case of my grandmother, she grew up on a farm that was owned by a large landowner, and her family was not very well treated by this landowner, like many of the workers who lived on that farm.
Rafa, it's so interesting when you say that. I was thinking about, there was one review I read. I'm going to read a little bit of line from it. It says, for the first time in literary history, the Jibaros, am I saying correctly?
Jíbaro, yes.
Jibaros, okay. The iconic inhabitants of the Puerto Rican Campos become the writers of their own stories. And this is like, the beautiful, like this person's like, very laudatory of this book. And there's, sort of lifting up. And I think that's so powerful about the way that you write and the way that you make sure that Latinx voices are centered. And I know we've just, Latinx Heritage Month, or Latinx Heritage should be celebrated 305 days a year. But what does Latinx Heritage Month mean to you? I guess that's where I want to stop for a moment. I have you answer that question, and then we'll invite on the folks who are going to ask you a couple of questions. But maybe if we can just talk about what does it mean to you? And I'll say that I think at the time this video will be shown, it will also be like Indigenous Heritage Month. And I know you also have spent a lot of time thinking about indigeneity in Puerto Rico.
Yes.
So if you want to merge that into your answer,
Yes.
that'd be great.
Oh, yes, those are very good questions. So first, what's very crazy about this project that most Puerto Ricans did not know until I came across the stories and looked at them and looked at the documentation that was generated by BOAS as the process was undergone. For BOAS to be able to document the largest collection of folklore of any country, any territory, he needed an army, literally an army of people. And of course, an army of people meant a lot of money. So he came up with a very simple idea. Why don't we have the people who do the stories, the people who sing, the people who know the conundrums, why don't we ask them to write? However, it's a small island. You still need more people. So the people, mainly the people who wrote the stories, the oral folklore samples, were children of the school system, of the public school system. Now, what's also very interesting is that at that time when BOAS was gathering this folklore, this is 1915, and the Puerto Ricans were being legally forced to start using English. And one of the areas in which English was imposed upon Puerto Ricans was in the public school system. So children are being exposed to English and also being told, okay, well, we have this project that you have to do in Spanish. So that's basically what my book is all about. What does it mean for a territory that has been invaded by a foreign entity, and the foreign entity being the United States, and the children being the first ones to be forced to do things that culturally were not what they were doing before. And that's what I found crazy of this process. BOAS was also in Puerto Rico interested in documenting what he thought were the remains of the Taíno indigenous people. Quillua, you will remember that we went to the heart of the Taíno land in Utuado. This is a place where he documented what it is today, the largest ballpark and ceremonial park in the Caribbean. And it's a beautiful place. It's an area that contains maybe 14. I'm not giving you an exact number, but it's an area large enough that has several ballparks. And you're thinking, so what do you mean? What were they playing? So these Taino Indians were playing something that looks very much like soccer, and the same ball game that Central American Indians were also playing. So of course, you're thinking that there was a connection between the Central American Indians and Puerto Ricans, and the answer is yes. You know, it was part of a continental indigenous culture, and that's what it's beautiful about Boas's project. However, Boas wanted Puerto Rican culture. So I'm pretty sure that the instructions that he gave to children, or actually the instructions that teachers received so that they could pass those instructions to children, did not include indigenous cultural patterns or stories, etc. So unfortunately, there are not that many stories that contain indigenous people. Also, very, very interesting, although Boas documented an area that it is predominantly African-American or Puerto Rican, African-Puerto Rican, and Quillua, you will remember Loíza. We also went to Loíza. Boas, unfortunately, decided not to use any of that, any of those samples. That has been my biggest query. Why did Boas did not use that rich oral folklore that he refers to in several letters? And he must have understood that that was not a decision, because if you know Zora Neale Hurston, you're thinking, is Boas the same Boas with Zora Neale Hurston? And the answer is yes.
Yes.
As you will know, Boas was some kind of mentor to Zora Neale Hurston. Critics are still debating whether, you know, they had a bad relationship or not. Boas was a very hard-headed professor. And the reason I know is that I have read many letters that he wrote to students and to other scholars, and I can tell you that he ruled with a strong fist. So a long answer to answer your question. The indigeneity part of my book is that tenacity of Puerto Ricans to hold on to what they think is Puerto Rican, and that tenacity is reflected in ways in which the Taino organizations in Puerto Rico are becoming very vocal, very political, and to the point that they are saying something like, okay, so if the Puerto Rican government does not want to deal with the American government in terms of, you know, equal nations, we are. And that's where things are when it comes to Puerto Rican indigenous nations. None of these groups have been recognized as indigenous nations, and I will say that perhaps that will be their agenda within the next years, that these Puerto Rican indigenous groups are tired of waiting for the Puerto Rican government to really approach the U.S. Congress in seeking equal rights. Or even in I will not be surprised if any of these groups will start a pro-independence movement.
Wow, that's so. I mean, okay, so I'm going to let the other folks come on and introduce themselves. I will say, Rafa, that I'm so excited that I think when this video comes out, it will be like Native American and Indigenous Heritage Month, and so I think it's like such a rich conversation to talk about this, and then even think about sort of what we've just been talking about, right? Latinx history and why it's so important to preserve the history and to preserve the oral traditions. So I know we have two wonderful folks with us. Both have been at book club conversations previously and are really active members in different ways of the book club. And so I'll let them introduce themselves, and they're going to ask you a question, Rafa. It's been wonderful to have you with us. Who I think I'll ask Chandra if you want to introduce yourself first, and then we'll turn to David. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, Chandra Foster. I'm in Fort Mill, South Carolina, right outside of Charlotte. I've been a member of the book club, I guess, since its inception. I know, Rafa, you and I have been in some discussions on some of the books that we've read, and it's been such a wonderful experience to be reminded and to be mindful in that kind of setting with such a variety of people. The group, as you know, has people from probably their 80s and 90s, all the high school members. So to get the different points of views and to get perspectives that you may not have thought about has been one of the great things that I have gathered from this book club. I've always read, but to be able to discuss what I've read with such great thinkers such as yourself and Kajula, Mrs. Lowry, and everyone else has been just such a wonderful addition to my life. So, Kajula, thank you so much. Rafi, thank you for sharing your book with us.
Thank you.
It is amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chandra. We love having you in the book club, and it's I agree with you absolutely. Like, reading is something that you always like, if you love reading, you love reading, right? But then like actually being able to come and discuss ideas and thoughts and have those things like interrogated and challenged is like the beauty of the book club. And we've had some great books, some great conversations. I can't wait for our group to continue to get together, and I'm really excited. So David, would you introduce yourself, and feel free to ask your question that you might have.
Sure. Thank you, Kijua. So good evening, everybody. My name is David Valdez, and I'm a junior political science major at Morehouse College. I am also a civic engagement scholar activist with the Lowry Institute. And Dr. Ocasio, I just want to let you know, it's an honor to have you with us today. It's greatly appreciated.
Thank you.
No problem. So I want to ask you about the current situation in Puerto Rico. I know that the island has faced many challenges recovering from recent hurricanes. And I'm from Miami, Florida, so I know just how devastating a hurricane can be on a region. Can you update us on the current situation since being hit?
So we're talking about two different situations, if you want to call them. First, Maria 5 years ago, and then Fiona a couple of weeks ago, or maybe a month ago by now. Puerto Rico has not recuperated from Maria. To start with, the electric infrastructure of the island is very bad. There are many reasons why we shouldn't be guessing about why, but the infrastructure needs major renovation, if not a new system. What would that be? We don't know, because it's both a combination that the Puerto Rican government is not very clear of what they can do, and that the power company was sold to a private company. And as I said, it's such a difficult situation because politically speaking, the Puerto Rican government is not strong. There's no other way to put it. And there is no, I would say there is not a strong plan whatsoever in terms of what needs to be done, given the fact that now the company, the power company, is in private hands.
That's really interesting. And I just have one more question to ask. So we know that the relationship between Puerto Rico and the US government is very different because it's not granted statehood. In your opinion, does the US do a good job at embracing Puerto Rican values and culture?
Yikes. That is a very hard question to ask. So if you're asking me personally, I would say the answer is no. I have literally lived my entire adult life in this country. I have seen how the US Congress deals with Puerto Ricans here, and I have seen how the Puerto Rican the Congress, the US Congress, deals with Puerto Rico on the island. And the only thing that comes to my mind is shameful. I have family in New York City that goes back 2 generations, and their living conditions are not any better than they were 2 generations back. Let's see if I can put this in good words. The American government, since day one after 1898, during at the end of the Spanish-American War, started a campaign to mobilize Puerto Ricans from the island to the United States. And that was forced migration in many ways. And the result has been an island that has been split. Families have been split. I am a good example. I'm the firstborn. I should be in my family. I should be with my family, particularly because I am needed there. Of course, most likely everybody who's listening to this is thinking, well, it's as easy as, move to your country, but often it is not that simple. Life is very complex and messy. You're Cuban American. We can literally say that these are islands that suffered the consequences of a Spanish-American War, in which our countries were devastated. In your case, even more so. The Spanish-American War was literally fought on the island of Cuba and the Philippines. But the federal mandates that followed in regards of Cuba and Puerto Rico, in many ways, describe the conditions of both islands. And we can extend the metaphor if we include the Philippines. As you guys know, most likely the Philippines was also part of the Spanish-American War booty that the United States won. And these are islands that socially, economically, and politically suffered because of the federal mandates. Now on the news, most likely you have heard about the Jones Act in relation to Puerto Rico, and how Puerto Rico is unable to literally do business with anyone who would want to buy whatever from the island, or we cannot buy whatever we want other than the United States. And this is a very simplistic way of explaining the Jones Act, but that's what it is. That financially speaking, we are unable to do business outside the United States.
Thank you for that perspective. I never really thought about it that way. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, David, you'll have to get, Professor Ocasio has written quite a few books, right? Rafa on Cuba, and
Yeah.
it has such an interesting long scholarship in that country in particular. So you have an incredible scholar here that that we've all been able to engage with. Rafa, is there anything that we can do that that anybody watching tonight or watching this video recording later can do to support Puerto Rico? Are there any, I know we're going to have a list that we'll provide as well, but is there anything that you would advise people to do?
So I was joking with Miss Laurie. The first thing you need to do is go to that island, go as a tourist. However, be very mindful or be a mindful tourist, I should say. Go out, and if you have a chance, even if it's a couple of hours, do some kind of volunteer work. Just as simple as that. Get to know Puerto Ricans on the streets. Get to know Puerto Ricans in museums. I mean, there are many ways in which you can interact with Puerto Ricans. So that would be my number one. My number two, be very mindful of where your money goes to if you donate. I will say, and this is what I've been telling any one of my friends and people at Agnes Scott, go out of the traditional foundations that, and there's many good foundations. I'm not saying that they're not good. But often these foundations, as you know, have a particular agenda in mind in terms of who gets what or how to reach who needs what. And I've been telling people, if you practice a particular faith and you feel comfortable donating to churches, churches in Puerto Rico, more so now than before, they're beginning to do social projects. It's easier for them because they are in the neighborhoods that need the money or need the help. So don't be shy about giving to churches as well.
That's wonderful, Rafa.
Whether it's Catholic or Protestant. Actually, I should add that perhaps I should say that maybe Protestant churches, as we speak in Puerto Rico, have a stronger social base in terms of providing for social work for the communities where they are established.
That's Rafa, it's been so wonderful to be with you. I'm so grateful to Chandra and David, who have basically made clear what we do in book club and the kinds of beautiful conversations we have. David, you asked phenomenal questions. I love that. I love the question about understanding the complex history and relationship to the island in the United States government. I think those are hard questions to ask sometimes, but these are the kinds of questions we engage in the book club. So they're really, really important ones. And so I'm really grateful to our book club members for being with us. I'm really grateful to this incredible scholar who happens to be a longtime friend of mine and also a staple in Atlanta in terms of scholarship. And I hope that you will continue, for those of you that are watching this, continue I think what Rafa said was so important. Immerse yourself. If you don't know a lot about Latinx history, particularly Latinx History Month, again, it should be something we're trying to learn ourselves about, whatever culture or background we have. Our group is a multiracial, multi-generational, multiracial book club that engages all sorts of topics and all sorts of wonderful readings and all sorts of wonderful people. And every now and then we get a credible author like Rafa here with us. So the Puerto Rico call to action, I see people asking about that as well in our chat. So I think we've talked a little bit about that, but we will add some more information in the recording about it as well. Thank you. Is there anything else that you wanted to say, Rafa, before we close? I feel like I want to ask you about so many other things and then we didn't get things on.
Exactly.
There'll have to be a part two. I know, were you saying something, Chandra?
I said exactly. There's so many questions.
Yeah, I feel like there'll have to be a part two. And I feel like you probably have more books than you, Rafa. I mean, you brought up Zora Neale Hurston and Frances Boas' relationship, and I don't know how many people know that she was an anthropologist. And so,
A
like,
great one too.
yes, an incredible anthropologist, right? All of the incredible work she did around formerly enslaved African people is so important. So is there any last thing any of our book club members wants to ask or say before we wrap up? Okay, no pressure. I wanted to give you an opportunity if you wanted to. Well, thank you, everyone. I hope you have an absolutely wonderful night. I think we will continue to think about how we can support Puerto Rico. I love the suggestions you made, Rafa. Those were so important to us, and we will continue to learn ourselves around Puerto Rican history and culture. And thank you for being our guide on this journey.
Thank you very much.
And
Thank
I
you.
didn't ask you what the picture is behind you, Rafa, but you always have some background that's amazing. Is it something that we should know? Oh, it's a flag.
It's a flag. It was
Puerto Rico
part
flag.
of maybe 4 or 5 years ago. There was a movement to force a Puerto Rican governor to resign after, well, it was a series of events, but what really was his worst dealing was that he was caught speaking very badly about women, and you know, it was a series of bad recordings, and they finally forced him to resign, and that was the revolutionary flag that they were using for that movement.
Oh, I love that you have a
Nice.
revolutionary flag behind you for our Racial Justice Club. That sounds like exactly how we should end the night. Thank you all again. Have a wonderful night.
Thank you.
Thank you.